Hello,
Rob?
hello, everybody. Yes.
You start, Rob.
So, um, I'm seeing the leaders in lending. Sally, if we could kick to the next. Yeah,
Hey.
there we go. Perfect. Um, so I am Rob Roldan. I'm with Class Valuation. A little bit of background on our organization. We were established in 2009. We've been at this a long time now. We are one of the largest, if not the largest AMC in the nation. We have access to over 25,000 appraisers nationwide. We operate in all 50 states, and we have over 700 team members. Now, I think it's important to distinguish here that we have access to over 25,000 appraisers nationwide, but every other AMC has access to that as well. Um, what makes us different is that we have over 250 staff appraisers. They're actual team members that work for our organization. So if you have a problem with a file or you have a revision request or whatever it might be, we aren't relying on a subcontractor or a 1099 person to get to that request. I can literally pick up the phone and call another team member and say, hey, can you prioritize this? We really need to get this one out the door a little bit quicker. We've completed over 500,000 appraisals last year. And I believe since our inception, we're getting close to, very close to 3 million, I believe, appraisals completed. Sally, is there anything you want to add here?
Yeah, I think not only just the staff appraisers, I have never been in part of an organization that just simply has so many appraisers. Right? I mean, like
Yes.
you and I are both appraisers, and in just the in our leadership team, the amount of really well qualified appraisers, and then in our escalations team and our QC, we are just when we say we're class valuation, I think that's just a real reflection of how many appraisers we have. And
Agreed. We're
a
lucky. We're lucky in that regard.
lot of expert knowledge there.
Yep.
Rob, you've been appraising for how long? 20 years?
Yes, yes, over 20 years in the business. I've been with Class for over 10 years. I have had a few shifts and turns inside the organization. I'm one of the VPs here. I'm on the sales team now, but for a long time I was in QC and did a lot of the stuff that Sally deals with too on a daily basis. So, a little bit about myself. I like being outdoors, kayaking, camping, hiking. If I can't do that, then give me some golf clubs and I'm a happy guy.
Great. And just a little bit about me. I have a couple of roles inside of class. Everybody usually knows that I am the EVP of Class Union, which is our credit union division. And I have a passion for credit unions. And that came, I owned my own AMC that got purchased by Class, and we specialized actually 99% of our work was for credit unions. I also run our post QC department, so that's the escalation team. That's when everything absolutely goes to crap, and we're trying to fix it. And luckily, the percentage of that is not that high, but it does happen. And included in that department is the reconsideration of values. So we actually work on those. That comes under my department. Um, and I'm also a real advocate for appraisal diversity and kind of promoting this, combating valuation bias, because I've actually seen it in play, and really getting the subjectivity out of appraisal reports. And for fun, I am a huge college sports fan. I am actually an Arkansas Razorback fan, which is a little unusual with my accent. This afternoon, I'm headed to San Francisco for the Sweet 16, so go Hogs. So that's what we are about. So who's an appraiser, Rob?
Who is the appraiser? Yes. The appraiser is someone who is expected to complete appraisals, valuation services in a manner that's independent, impartial, and objective. Those are the three most important words when it comes to being an appraiser. It literally, part of my job is to promote the public trust. And So that really does boil down to what it is that we do. Out of everybody that is involved in the loop, the appraiser is the only one who has no skin in the game whatsoever, right? And that's what allows them to be objective and to do the analysis and the digging to come up with an opinion of value, which takes me to the next question. That's really all that an appraisal is developing an opinion of value. Now, I want to touch on this for a minute because I think it's important for everybody to know in the world that we operate in, there are three approaches to value. There's the cost approach, which is pretty straightforward. What would it developing an opinion of value based off of what it would cost to replicate or replace any of the improvements that are in place. The other approach is the income approach. Again, pretty self-explanatory. Developing an opinion of value based off of the income that a property can produce, right? Where the rubber meets the road and where the GSEs, Fannie, Freddie, HUD, FHA, everybody focuses on the sales comparison approach, which is what we're going to be talking a lot about today. Excuse me. The sales comparison approach really involves finding physically similar sales, closed sales, applying adjustments to those sales, and then formulating an opinion of value after everything's said and done and all the analysis has been completed. I just want everybody to understand kind of how the adjustments work, right? So if you have an inferior feature on a comparable, that property, that comparable would be adjusted upward. If it's a superior feature, if it has something that the subject property doesn't, you would expect to see a downward adjustment for that lacking feature. That's pretty much the sales comparison approach in a nutshell. There's a lot more to it. Again, there's a lot of analysis that has to go in and digging through a whole bunch of data, but that's putting it into a nice little box with the bow on top. Sally, do you have anything you want to include here?
Oh, I have my acronyms, comp beta, subtract, CBS, and comp inferior, add, CIA. Until I taught appraisal classes for a long time. But I think just on that opinion, Rob really touched upon this impartiality, unbiased opinion. And the GSEs are really, really pushing removing any form of subjectivity out of appraisal reports. And that may be really subjective comments about, the subject is close to a par. But what does close mean? They want specificity, I can never say that, and support. And the most important thing with that sales comparison approach is support. Support for the adjustments, support for the sales use. And I always say it's very simple. If you got a buyer trundling down the street and they've been approved by, the lender, the credit union, the broker for, to buy a house up to 600,000, they're not going to look at a house that is $1 million usually, right? So that isn't necessarily comparable. Or they really want to be on a lake. They're not going to look at a property on a golf course, right? And so it's that competing property, what is competing for buyers and sellers in the market. So what is a reconsideration of value? So very simply, it's actually an appeal. And in every profession, every kind of aspect, we have appeals. In the legal profession, you have an appeal. In medical field, you could get a second opinion. So literally what a reconsideration of value is an appeal. So a homeowner has an appraisal done and the value comes in and they feel it's too low. And so they have the ability to appeal. This appeal is supposed to be evidence-based. You can't just say, hey, I hate this value, change it. It's got to be evidence-based. You have to provide actual factual information in order to get the appeal to work. So that may be that there are sales that could have been used that weren't, that you feel that could have not been, or there may be mistakes in the appraisal. And that's not good if there are mistakes in the appraisal, right? That the appraiser missed a whole floor on the house. And believe me, it happens. Or actually, we've had appraisers who have appraised the wrong house, but that's a whole nother thing. Actual evidence, they missed something. Maybe they didn't have the correct acreage, or that they didn't notice that you'd remodeled the kitchen, which I would hope they should have noticed. But it has to be that reconsideration has to be evidence-based. The keys to success is to provide documentation, to provide good alternate comparable sales if that's what you want to do, or clearly state what the factual errors are. And we're going to kind of address a few things in that because that's really important. But also to bear in mind, what is the appraisal used for? The interesting thing in kind of appraisal speak, the borrower is not the actual client or intended user of the report. The appraiser completes an appraisal for a lender for mortgage purposes. That appraisal is checking to make sure there is sufficient collateral to support the mortgage. So sometimes and obviously the borrower under the Equal Credit Act, I think that's right, has a copy of that appraisal, but it's sometimes hard for them to understand and really also understand in the context of the intended use of that appraisal. So, and going back to that, I just want to say that, also we're kind of protecting as appraisers the borrower from overpaying for a house. One of the things, Rob and I have discussed this, that happens, we kind of always surprised that we will get reconsideration a value from a borrower who is buying a house and maybe they've been told by their realtor to do it. And I'm going, really? You want to pay more for this house than the appraiser says it's worth? But, there are other reasons and things like that. But I really kind of think it's important to understand that that's what the appraiser is doing, making sure that someone isn't overpaying necessarily. So there have been some changes in policy on the ROV process, and really it's putting some guardrails around the process and ensuring that everybody's kind of doing the same thing. And one of the reasons we have on that is that everybody had different formats for doing this. Some lenders were telling borrowers they had the ability to appeal the appraisal, some weren't. And we had some appraisers who just didn't want to do it. They are like, oh, I'm not going to change my value. I'm not even going to address that appeal. Or, hey, if you want me to look at this ROV, I'm going to charge you money. Well, that's not right. So the GSEs and FHA kind of have implemented, effective last year in October, some kind of guardrails on formalizing the process. Probably in my mind, the biggest thing around these changes is the disclosure. And there is a disclosure at the time of the loan that when the appraisal comes in, there's the ability to appeal with a reconsideration of value. And then another disclosure is sent out when the appraisal is sent out or shortly thereafter. That gives them the ability. There are also some kind of rules around it, and there are only, you have to use a maximum of 5 sales. And there's a kind of one and done kind of principle that you can't send in multiple appraisals, reconsiderations of value. And that's really important because at some point it becomes kind of an appraisal independence issue. So we kind of want to make sure of that. But also, I think important is to understand the background of why they formalized the reconsiderations. And it was really kind of stemming from some of the accusations of appraisal bias, and particularly, racial bias in appraisals that have kind of come to the forefront in the last 5 years. And giving, a little bit of power or ability for a borrower to be able to argue against that. And so I think that's really important we kind of understand that. And that's the real push of the GSEs and FHA in that. The interesting thing is that VA has always had a formalized process around ROVs. And I don't know why everybody else didn't kind of flow into that.
Tidewater, right?
Right? I mean,
Yep.
I don't know why it took us so long to do that. Um, So, what does that mean for the lender? Well, you've got to have very clear processes and procedures. I'm sure by now most of the people on this call have got that. A clear kind of review and resolution procedure for ROVs. And making sure that the ROV process and the actual ROV itself is meaningful and it's not in any way derogatory. It doesn't contain anything that would violate appraiser independence. And that's it, and if you guys do that as a lender, we look at it as an AMC. We have a very stringent kind of review policy, and we throw things back if they're not. Obviously, the disclosure process is important. The rationale for the ROV. And then when the amended appraisal comes back, you're making sure that that appraisal addresses adequately the ROV. That's incredibly important. So the funny thing is, and I don't mean to scare anybody here, but I did hear that a buyback from Fannie on failure to disclose on the ROV. So disclosure is incredibly important.
And again, that's at the beginning of the process, right? At the time of application. And then again, at the time of delivery. And it doesn't necessarily have to be instantaneous at the time of delivery, but think hours and not days, right? I would think that that would be best practice.
Yes, yeah, yeah. So what does this mean to the appraiser, Rob?
Well, um, kind of like Sally mentioned earlier, it was a little bit like the wild, wild west before these procedures were put in place. As an appraiser, you might send something over and ask me to, I missed a checkbox or I have a word misspelled in my report. And then you throw along three alternate sales, you call it an ROV. I could fix the errors that I had in there, but I didn't necessarily have to respond to the ROV request.
Mhm.
That has all changed now, right? There are expectations in place from Fannie, Freddie, HUD that one, the appraiser is going to respond to any concerns or issues. So instead of going AWOL on the ROV request and commenting on the 3 or 5 alternate sales, the appraiser has to have a logical, cogent response to whatever concerns are being brought forward by the borrower, right? The other expectation here is a reasonable turn time, right? I
Mhm.
know our policy, I believe, is 48 hours, right? Is the amount of time, right, that we give an appraiser to respond on one of these. Obviously, if it's complex or there's timing issues, it could take a little bit longer. But the expectation is there across the board from everybody involved, that you need to have one, again, a cogent response. Two, it has to be completed in a timely manner.
Yeah, the reasonable time is really important, and but also there is the GSEs don't give us a specific time, for the simple reason that sometimes an appraiser will have to do additional research or whatever. But we have an internal SLA of 48 hours, and but with the understanding sometimes that goes over. The borrower, I can't remember, that's mine or yours, Rob?
That's you, Sally. That's all yours.
That's mine.
Yeah.
We're so prepared, right? No, that's me. The big thing for the borrower, as we said, is the right to challenge a potentially inaccurate appraisal. That's huge. And also the right to get clear instruction on how to do this. This is a very daunting process, I think, for any borrower that I feel like my appraisal's not accurate. I feel like it's low, and how do I address this? And in any set of in classes ROV form, there are very, very clear instructions on how to complete that form and what kind of evidence to put forward and a full explanation of the process, when you can expect an answer, how many sales that you can add. The fact that they must be sales and not listings is really important. And so from a borrower standpoint, you know, it's assisting through and helping everybody be able to do that. And the ability is very empowering for a borrower to be able to do that. And we're going to give you some tips on that to share with your borrowers and on how to be successful essentially on it. We do have a question, Rob, from V, who says, clarity, please. Are you stating that the ROV disclosure has to go out again when we deliver the appraisal to the borrower? Yes, that's an absolute yes. Now, it doesn't have to be immediately. In other words, it doesn't have to be attached necessarily to the appraisal, but shortly thereafter, as long as you have a process around that disclosure, that is fine. So obviously there would be kind of sometimes class delivers for our clients, and we put a simple disclosure on the delivery that says that. So that's an excellent question, B. So elements of a complete ROV request. So what have we got to have in there to make this successful, right? We have to have, you know, supporting documentation, comparable sales, closed sales. That means it is actually closed, no listings, no pending transactions. And one important thing to kind of say there is sometimes we'll get a sale submitted in an ROV process that is that sold after the effective date of the appraisal. Unfortunately, that is not a closed sale that can be considered because it occurred after the effective date. It's just it's one of those things on things. You know, the appraiser may have put it into an appraisal as a consideration of something else, whether it's how the market is going or whatever. But yes, it's got to be closed sales.
I would throw in there, Sally, that there's a time and a place for active
Mhm.
listings or pendings.
Yeah, good
The
point.
ROV process is not one of those instances. We
Yeah,
want to make sure we have data that is
yeah,
closed and
yeah,
preferably confirmable through the MLS,
yeah.
is right.
And important in those closed sales is that they have to be similar to the subject property. And by similar, it means that they have to be close, they have to be recent, within proximity. And I kind of go back, kind of really good way of thinking about this is if your borrower is looking at going to buy an alternate house to the subject property, which properties would they look at? You know, they are talking to their realtor, they've got a whole set of properties. Which ones would they have looked at if they hadn't have bought the subject property? I think that's kind of a easy way to say it. So if it's in a different school district and they, you know, it may not be comparable because, you know, often, you know, someone is looking at school district or a particular neighborhood. Or as I said, you know, if you want lakefront, you don't want golf on a golf course. And you know, Rob wants to live on a golf course. He doesn't want to be on a lakefront. So,
I'd take either.
would you? Oh, you're a better person than me. Yeah, and evidence is great. I mean, if you can get the MLS kind of printouts or reference numbers, you know, one of the things we find when we you know do these ROVs, we send if you send them to the appraiser, like that sale doesn't exist. And so they like the MLS ones because typically appraisers use MLS sales because they're able to verify them. And they can look at the pictures of the interior, they can call the realtor, and they're able to kind of see. And typically people do buy homes through the, you know, through a realtor on the MLS, so that kind of makes them comparable. The other thing is those sales have to be an arm's length transaction. And what do we mean by that? We mean kind of, well, that the people who are educated in some way, that, you know, that they are not related, that they're, you know, they're not kind of pushed into something. And that's why I mean educated, I don't mean educated that they have to have a high school education or a degree, or as I mean, they are not
Well informed, right?
willing. There you go.
Too well informed.
Yes, yes. Um, so when you write your RV, concise narrative, and be careful, don't insult. I think we'll talk about it later. Don't insult your appraiser. Not very good if you kind of put something, which I saw last week, and this was a credit union, and they let it through, and it was like, oh, this appraiser's dumb. Really, it's like, nah, don't put that. That's really not good.
You're
Um,
gonna have a tough time making friends like that, right?
Right, yeah. So organized, clear labeling, that kind of thing is very good. And keep away from those subjective opinions, right? Use facts. My kitchen was remodeled in 2022, and perhaps, here are some receipts or something like that. Clear facts, not like, I think my house is better because it's blue and not pink or something like that.
Sally, it looks like we have a couple of questions here. And so one of them is the disclosures. Can it be part of the closing disclosures? So again, I'm not an expert in lending, and these really are responsibilities of the lender, but to my understanding, the disclosure goes out at the time of application. And then again, how it's been explained to me is you can send the exact same disclosure once again
Mhm.
after delivery. So, and as I mentioned earlier, think hours and not days. If you keep that at the front of mind, you should be fine.
Yeah. So, to V's kind of point there, no, not with, well, I mean, I don't know when you send your closing disclosures, but, I think it has to be related to that appraisal being delivered.
Mhm.
And so I think that's kind of, someone else may be able to answer that, but I don't know.
And then we also have from V, how many additional closed sales should be provided? Or is it left up to the lenders to decide? Um, for the policy that we're talking about now, it has a maximum number of five. That
Mhm.
doesn't mean that you need to send five, but you can send up to five closed sales.
Yeah. And that's kind of important because, we in the Wild West that Rob related to, I'd see like an MLS printout. And
Kitchen sink approach.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. And how can an appraiser kind of just consider that? Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, V. She's asking questions others are afraid. We appreciate that.
Keep them coming, V.
Yeah. Okay, so I think some of this we kind of, looked at geographically close proximity. Proximity is very important. One of the things that happened just to kind of give you a little background, when an appraisal is submitted to us from an appraiser, it is also submitted to the GSEs. It actually goes into a portal called a UCDP portal. So it goes in that portal and it gets scrubbed essentially.
Data mined, yes.
And proximity is a really important part of the choice of the comparable, especially using sales that are ignoring sales that are proximate for distant sales. You better have a good reason. And sometimes there are unique properties, right? There are features and things like that might kind of tend towards that, but proximity is very important. Um, a data sale, absolutely within the last 12 months. And I would say if you go below 12 months, you really probably aren't going to be successful. And preferably in the last 3 months. Real estate, as everybody knows, is very seasonal, right? So we want to make sure that it is really showing the market conditions that exist as of the effective date.
Can I jump in here too real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to say the 12-month item on date of sale is very important. And the more recent that your sale is, the more likely it is to be included in the report. But
Mhm.
with all that said, That doesn't mean that if the house next door to me sold 14 months ago, that could still very well be relevant to the process. So you want to stay within 12 months whenever possible, but you might every now and then run into something that's a little bit further out, but is extremely relevant for some other reason. And it's not as if there's a rule in place that the appraiser can't use anything past 12 months. It's just not best practice. I just wanted to make sure we're all on the same
That's
page.
a really good point. Maybe we share what the best comp is. What's the best comp? The best comp is the subject property.
Right? Very
It
true.
is. If the
Yeah.
subject property is sold, it's actually the best comp. And actually, it's always very hard to kind of argue if you've got a recent sale of the subject property that it is not a great indication of what the value is. So,
It was an arm's length transaction and it
yeah,
was reasonably exposed, right?
yeah,
On the market. Yeah. I think it makes a great comp. Yeah.
we talk about location and views and this becomes kind of really important, I think, when you get into some very specialized type of properties, when, mountains and lakes and ocean and things like that. And also the bad stuff, right? The noise or, other external factors, the commercial, maybe a commercial one. So very important. I think the actual physical character. I think age is a huge part. I'm someone, I always laugh that, I'm a little bit bougie. That's what I always say. I like living in a newer house. I grew up, as you can tell, from England, and I lived in a house that was 600 years old, and it was bloody miserable. I like being in a new house that has all the nice bells and whistles, and I would not think to compare a house that was 30 or 40 years old to a newer home. Similarly, if I had somebody that wanted to buy that 100, 200-year-old house, that person buying that house is unlikely to buy a brand new house too. So those kind of things, condition, quality, architectural style. I always claim there is such a thing as an ugly house. So not a pretty one.
We have a quick question here from Jeff regarding the allowable number of sales that a borrower may submit. You mentioned that 5 sales is the limit, and had that limit previously been 3? So previously there was nothing
There
in,
was no limit.
right?
No,
There
in
was no
fact,
limit.
Class had 7. I think we had 7 on our original ROV.
I think
Oh,
it's changed a few times over the years.
yeah,
But
yeah,
again, like this is now policy. It's
yeah,
5,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
No more than 5.
yeah. That's it. And more and most important, that one and done.
Hmm.
So,
Yep. Uh,
uh, some other things is that gross living area. You want to explain ANSI, Rob?
so ANSI is a standardized way of measuring improvements or a property, right?
Mhm.
And it really doesn't need to be any more complex than that. It is more complex than that, but for our purposes here, it's an across the board way that all appraisers who are doing work for Fannie or Freddie, they're obligated to measure a home in this very specific manner.
Yeah.
And that just creates um, more cohesive, reasonable results across the board. So in theory, you could have, there was a time when you could have 3 appraisers go out and measure a property and you could get back 3 wildly different reported sizes.
Mhm.
That has narrowed substantially with the inclusion of ANSI into our profession.
Yeah, and that's really kind of important, because they used to view attics differently and other areas. And so as you kind of put some really kind of some standardization, uniformity into that process, where this kind of really comes into play is on in the reconsiderations, because sometimes a borrower may feel that the gross living area the appraiser utilizes is different to what they perceive as their gross living area. And
Mm.
that's often in kind of basement areas. Basically, an appraiser does not count in above grade GLA anything that you go down into the basement area. as we call it. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have value. And it has a spot in the form for it, and it does have value. And the same as with some areas that are kind of attic areas or additional areas. I have a finished area over my garage, and it's actually it's about 650 square feet. It's pretty large, right? But it is not included in my GLA because I have to walk out into my garage and then go up some stairs to get to it. So it's not contiguous to the main living area.
Right.
So
Contiguous
does it have
finished area.
value?
Yep.
Better have value. Someone better consider, if they appraise my house, they better consider it as having value. It's just not included in the gross living area.
I see this concept a lot where folks think that an area that's below grade is not being included in the opinion of value, or it was somehow left out. There is actually a spot in the report that is specifically for below
Mhm.
grade area. And I think it's important here too to point out that any area that's below grade, even if it's by just a few inches, the GSEs require the appraiser to report that as basement or below grade area, right? They don't have an option. So,
No option. Anytime you step down, I always
yep,
say that, step down from the main area,
yep.
it goes below grade.
And yes,
So,
that would include walkout basements too, that lead down
yeah,
to the
well,
lake.
yeah,
Yeah,
right.
right.
So the house is built on a hill or
Yeah,
something. So
exactly.
for intents and
Exactly.
purposes, from the back, it looks like it's above grade, but at
Mhm.
some point you had to go to, you've gone down. We do have properties that have no bedrooms. And because all the bedrooms are below grade, that doesn't mean that they have no bedrooms. They obviously have, but it's just they're not reported in the above grade area.
Mhm.
And if you think of an earth home I always call them hobbit homes. I hope I haven't insulted anybody by saying something is a hobbit home, like an earth home, they actually have zero gross living area. So above grade. So,
Correct. Yep.
okay, this is your slide here, Rob.
Okay, so this is an actual example of how the appraisal process works. Okay, so if everyone can see, there's a small dotted line on this map, right, that separates north from south. And we've got the subject property in red. Comparable number one is just to the west of it there. And we also have comparable number four, which is an active listing. So number one is a model match. Comparable number four is an active listing. You'll note two and three are south of that water feature. And what was taking place in this neighborhood were two separate builders. The one to the south was using slightly higher quality of construction, better building materials. They were charging a premium as a result. So just keep that at the front of your mind. The next slide, we're going to show you a sale grid. Okay. And we kind of had things laid out earlier in the previous slide showing you how proximity is important, location, view. This is where you can find all of that data, right? And you can see firsthand how the appraiser utilizes it to develop the opinion of value. So the column on the left is the subject property. The next one is comp number one, followed by comps two, three, and then the last one, comp four, again, active listing, but in the same development. Now, what I'd like to point out here is this assignment, this report was completed in a market that had increasing values. So I'd like you to note date of sale slash time is a line item. It's the $27,000 adjustment. There you go. Perfect. Thank you, Sally. So if you remember earlier when we were speaking, I mentioned if a comparable has an inferior feature, it's adjusted upward. Market trends are very much the same way. If you're in an increasing market and you have an older sale in the report, maybe it's out past 90 days, or maybe it's past 6 months, or maybe it's only a few months difference, a couple of months. It just depends on what the market trend is that's being reported. An older sale should be adjusted upward in an increasing market, and an older sale should be adjusted downward in a declining market. Okay. So another thing I want to point out here is location. So if you remember from the map, it mentioned you saw that the comps two and three were in an area that was slightly superior due to a higher quality of construction, just overall better building materials, condition, that kind of thing. The appraiser addressed that with a location adjustment here, and you can see it's minus $10,000 on comps 2 and 3. Okay. So again, once all these adjustments are applied, where you really want to pull your focus to is down at the very bottom. Yes, and it's outlined for you in red. This is where, after all the data's been analyzed, everything's been scrubbed, you've taken everything into account and into consideration, you come to this last line. And that's where you're going to look to try to develop your opinion of value. This was an almost perfect example, right? The opinion came in at 523, and it's completely supported with all of the data that you see on the sales grid. And I also want to mention here that all of the adjustments and everything that you see here on this grid should be explained fully in the sales comparison approach comments in the report itself. Do you want
That
to
was crazy. Did you do that appraisal?
No, I didn't. I'm in Detroit, not Arizona.
Well, you might have nipped down there to do that. That was good. Okay, let's talk about some tips for success because there are some really good. There are some very good online resources, unbelievable resources. Redfin, Zillow, Realtor.com. If you can get into your local MLS, or you probably can't, but you could have your realtor or a realtor friend who could find them. County property record websites. There's a lot of information on online, and a lot of them have search parameters. You can like draw a line around an area, and you can kind of put in different kind of filters in there to find what you want to find. So
Living
that
area criteria. Yeah, some of the
right,
filters on
bedroom
there are
counts.
very, very impressive, right? And if you don't know they're there or you aren't aware of them, right?
Yeah.
I know a lot of borrowers are stuck going to Redfin or Zillow or Realtor.com. A lot of the professionals have access to different tools, but for
Mhm.
most borrowers, this is the door. These are the doors that they have available to them. So if you can show them or teach them, or just point out to them, make sure that they understand that there are ways that they can search in there, tighten up that criteria, make their job easier, and probably find more realistic and reasonable data to send over for an ROV request.
Yeah, and as I said, when you do that, you can look at these houses. You can do a virtual walkthrough, these comparables, check that they look like the subject house, your own house, and make sure that they're similar. That now, one thing I'm just going to say, most of them have been staged. They look probably a little prettier than others, but kind of be reasonable about that. If there is a kind of something is missing in the appraisal, take a good photograph of it. And appraisers miss fireplaces. I know I've missed fireplaces before in the past. Sometimes they'll miss a bathroom or something like that. It's just there.
Mistakes happen. We're human, right?
Yeah, right. And that's why, that's why we do have appeals. Gather any of your permits, receipts, or anything else from what you've done. That's all important information, and just provide that information in an organized form. Anything else you got on that, Rob?
Um, I think it's worth noting here to, you'll see the illustrations there on the right.
Mhm.
If you are sending a borrower off out into the world of Redfin and Zillow, just remind them that it's worth scrolling through the entire listing and looking for some of the cues that you see there on the right, right? Again, you want to try to find sales that close through the MLS, really.
Mhm.
Um, Public record sales, yeah, they're out there, right? There's pocket sales. You can go into probably any BSNA software or your local municipal assessing database and find tons of transactions that have taken place. But again, if they weren't exposed on the open market, it's unlikely that the appraiser is going to include them in the report. So always look for the telltale signs of either saying, like in this instance, sold MLS, or the one just below that, it actually has the source highlighted, and then there's the MLS number. Look for those telltale signs. You know that you'll have a better chance of success using something that's sold through the
Yeah.
MLS.
I actually have an example of that. We have one recently where, a borrower had another sale and we couldn't verify, the appraiser couldn't get any verification from anybody on what the interior of the property was like. And there were no photos, nothing on it. And the appraiser's like, I can't use it. I don't have any way to verify the condition of it. So,
And that's very important, being an appraiser, to understand what the terms of the transaction were and to
mhm,
make sure to know what the condition of the property is. That's one of the things, it's one of the main things that drives people, right? When they're making a purchasing decision, condition, right? I mean, I would say that's probably um, top two, top three, right? How much money am I going to have to spend to get this place exactly how I want it, right?
right.
Um, I can touch here on keys to a positive outcome.
Mhm.
I can't stress this enough. To read through the entire report. It is not Stephen King material. It's not going to keep you up at night, right? It's probably going to be pretty boring, but some of the things like that we touched on earlier, Sally mentioned school district. You might not even realize that your property's sitting in a superior school district, or maybe it is the lesser of two or three school districts. You wouldn't know that unless you read through the report. It can give you more insight. It will give you insight into what the appraiser's thought process was. The appraisal should always explain how it got to the opinion of value. There should always be explanation there and reconciliation, right? We were talking about condition, quality, view, age. Make sure you're keeping all of these things at front of mind and suggesting to your borrower to use the filters that are available to them on the websites that they might visit, and dial in on things like this, right?
Mhm.
Um, we get this a lot. Don't sweat the small stuff. We will get stuff that comes in. Well, I just put in a new chain link fence, right? Or I've got a new mailbox and we've got a new front porch light. Those things are considered market expectations, right? So don't sweat the small stuff. Now, with that said, we do want to know everything, but the big ticket items that have been updated or improved upon, those are usually where we want to place our focus, okay? And then lastly, this can be a tough concept for folks to understand, but cost doesn't necessarily equal value in our world, okay? The adjustments that you see on the sale grid most times are derived straight from the market. They really, in theory, are best derived from market-driven data, right? There's other ways to adjust, but just because you spend $500,000 on a gorgeous infinity pool and an outdoor kitchen doesn't mean that you're going to see a $500,000 adjustment on the appraisal for that. Again, think market driven. What is going to impact the typical buyer for that property? Because you liked it and you spent $500,000 on it, that doesn't mean that the next person coming along, right, the next market participant would be willing to do the same. So if there's anything you want to add here, Sally.
No, I absolutely, that's a huge thing, I think, and it's a shame about the pool since I just put one in. It wasn't $500,000 though.
Okay.
But,
It it looks like we have some questions coming in, right?
let's answer some questions. We still have a few more minutes, so.
Yep. So where I lost them. There they are. Okay, so what's the normal success rate for ROVs? Is
Ah,
this worth it? Is it worth it?
yeah, now this is really interesting because this falls into my department at class. So, class is literally putting thousands of appraisals out there. Thousands a day, actually. And, the reconsiderations are fairly few considering. On average, we kind of see about 3% of appraisals that there are, and there is an appeal on a reconsideration. So
3% of overall volume, you're saying,
yes,
results in
3%.
an ROV.
Yeah, yeah. So here's the kind of thing that I think is interesting. we're seeing just under 30% success rate. So about just under 30% of those appraisals, which aren't very many. Remember that if you're looking at that, it's only 3% of total, but out of that 3%, the success rate is just under 30%. So, it means that if you do decide to, if your borrower does decide to put in an ROV, basically, you have nearly a third of an opportunity to maybe get a change in value on it. Now,
I,
having said that, here's the kind of other thing to that. That change in value, which I think is the next kind of question, is not usually a lot. And if you are expecting a major change in value, you may not be successful. So most of the changes are actually less than 3% too. So usually somewhere around 2% change in value on it. So, but I don't think those are bad odds, right?
I would say that at 30%, those are pretty good odds, right?
Yeah.
But it all boils down to using some of the keys that we presented here, right? It's just think like
Right.
garbage in, garbage out. If you send over a bunch of sales that are, twice the size of the subject property and they are located on a golf course or a lake and the subject isn't, those are what I would call an easy out for the appraiser, right? You're gonna get a concise
Yeah.
response back to exactly why it was rejected, right? So again, just think apples to apples. If you keep that at the front of your mind, you're
Yeah.
typically going to have a
And,
better chance of
you know,
success.
I have to say, I'm going to give kudos to the guys in our escalations team that run those ROVs. They know exactly what's supposed to go in them. They are, and our form is very easy, user-friendly to do. And, I think that we are and I think our appraisers too have had a lot of education into understanding the importance of this, and it is. And I mean, first of all, that there aren't a huge amount of appeals, very few really, and they kind of take up a large space of our time, consider.
Yes.
But that there are chances of quite a good chance of being successful.
We have a couple of more questions here too. I find this one to be pretty interesting. Do you find that ROVs are more common, excuse me, to challenge property features or to challenge the comps?
The comps.
I would agree. I would
Yeah.
agree too, because the comps that's the linchpin in the entire process, right?
That's
So
a great question,
that
though.
is a
And
good question.
it is but it usually is the comps. It's
Mhm.
usually hey, there are the sales out there, which is good.
Right. And then another question we have, do you have tips for older borrowers who aren't tech savvy for submitting materials for ROVs?
Yeah. Get your kids to do it for you. It may be. Get help. And I think that there are all kinds of things. I hate to say this, I'm a huge believer in ChatGPT. So, and actually, if you type into ChatGPT, how do I do an ROV, you probably get a really good kind of
I
response.
wouldn't be surprised. I'm going to try that actually when
Yeah,
we're done. I'm going to see what it kicks.
we actually use it when we're kind of looking at some of the ROVs that come in. It's great. But I think that it's a good question. Get help, really. Talk to a friend that's a realtor or something. But yeah, and use some of the kind of things that are on online, but it is a difficult one.
So we have a couple of more questions to it. One is now that FHA has rescinded, do you expect Fannie and Freddie will rescind the process as well?
Oh,
Yeah.
I don't
So
know. They haven't really rescinded, well, they have rescinded, but it's not really rescinded.
right. There's just parts of it that have been pulled back, right? And that's my understanding on it. I
Yeah,
believe that HUD does still have
they do
many
still
other things.
have.
Yeah,
Yeah,
everything that we talked about today is still very
still
much in
is.
place.
And also, some, hello, credit unions, my friends out there. Some of you guys aren't selling to Fannie and Freddie, but you still have, some things, interagency addresses, ROVs too. So that this is across the board. There is so much about Fannie and Freddie that it is kind of unknown right now. I think I don't see it. I don't see it being rescinded, but who knows?
The
I'm not.
future has not yet been written, right?
No,
So
we
we're,
don't
we're
know.
yeah, we're
But
gonna find out.
but I tell you, the big thing, the big thing is going to be, as most people know, we call it UAD 3.6, that the appraisal forms will be sunsetted, and we're going to have a new appraisal report. And so lots of changes actually in the appraisal world, and probably the ROVs are pretty fairly down on the expectation list, but I think that there's nothing really kind of stringent or hard in this policy. So I don't really see major changes being done.
I think we've got a couple of minutes left. V, you had a question and I know I saw it and I don't know if you pulled it or it just fell off.
It looks like it's in the chat.
Oh, can the loan officer or realtor assist the borrower with locating comps? I don't know about the loan officer. I know the realtor can. Um, do you know, Rob, about the loan officer, if the loan officer can?
So if we're talking borrower, the borrower, very much like you just mentioned, Sally, they can use any resource that they have available to them, right?
Yeah.
I don't see where it's an issue. Again, I'm not a loan officer, but I can't see where something like that would be a problem, especially if the borrower is reaching out. If your client's reaching out to you and you're asking you for help on something and you're staying compliant to the process, I don't see where there's an issue there at all.
Yeah.
No, in fact, I would almost consider it good service
Yeah,
on the
because the loan
part.
officer is completely separated from the appraiser
Right.
anyhow in the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah, there's no undue influence there in any way. So,
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us. This is amazing. This is a great discussion. Thank you, Rob, to you.
yeah, absolutely. I'm glad we all managed to get together and do this. Hopefully we do it again soon. And all of our doors are always open. If you have any questions or concerns, our contact information is there. Don't hesitate. Please reach out. We're here to help.
We're right there on the thing. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you all. As a reminder, this recording will be uploaded to Class Valuation's YouTube channel. We will also send an email out to everyone who registered with the link to the recording, as well as these resources. We also have a PDF that's a checklist that you can share with your borrowers as they go through the ROV process. Just a little helpful tool for them. But if you have any questions, like Sally and Rob mentioned, please don't hesitate to reach out. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Have a great
you.
day.
Bye-bye.